So this video is in response to a patron of mine who requested that I give sort of some clarification on what precisely is meant by the whole concept of the logos. Now you can sign up in the description below if you want to request a video topic yourself, but before we get into it here, just a quick disclaimer that this video is meant to be more of a brief and cursory take on this, and I do intend to address the topic in more detail in the future. So now I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with E. Michael Jones's popularization of the term logos. I did an entire interview with him on this channel about a year ago on the very subject. But since then, a lot of people have been sort of confused about his usage of the term. They don't exactly understand how an abstract concept like the logos, which seems to designate an impersonal principle like reason or intelligibility or order, how that could really map onto the personal identity of the Son of God. There seems to be a disconnect there, which would either anthropomorphize reason or intelligibility on the one hand, or just reduce the Son of God to some abstract monad or principle. So I thought I'd do a brief video here clarifying how these aspects of the term might be able to be reconciled. To do that, I think we should explore a bit how this term has been used in Greek philosophy prior to its usage in St. John's Gospel. Now, the philosophical usage of the term goes all the way back, of course, to the pre-Socratic, specifically Heraclitus. Now, Heraclitus, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is, of course, famous for holding to an ever-changing world without permanence or static being, and also held that, sort of as a signification of this, that fire constitutes the most basic, fundamental principle of all reality. Now, he also was among the first in this emerging intellectual tradition to apply the term logos to a properly metaphysical vision of reality. According to Heraclitus, logos refers to the immanent reason present in all things, binding them together as a cosmic unity. So immanent was the presence of logos in the cosmos that most scholars would identify Heraclitus with pantheism, even though, of course, some would consider him a bit more of a panentheist than a pantheist. But what's clear is that the logos, according to Heraclitus, is so immanent in the cosmos as to be intimately bound up with it, and therefore, on this view, the logos doesn't really bear the mark of transcendence emblematic of classical theism. Nevertheless, that he considers it to be, in some sense, at the very least, a perfective unity capable of subordinating all things to a cosmic order, I think is a significant development in the usage of this term, and no doubt, I would argue, contributed to the intellectual trajectory that would ultimately lead to the usage of the term logos in St. John's Gospel. Now, Aristotle, moving along here, interestingly enough, he doesn't really use the term in a metaphysical context, properly speaking. He used the term more to designate a phenomenon within the framework of rational, persuasive discourse. Thus, logos, on this view, would pertain to the human intellectual capacity to communicate truths via reasoned argument to another, and as such, it's not really altogether unrelated to Heraclitus' metaphysical use of the term, but he applies it to the realm of human rational discourse. Now, fast forward a bit to Middle Platonism and Neoplatonism, and you can see this concept take on an entirely new elevation in philosophical development, particularly in metaphysics, as you'd expect from Platonists. Most importantly and most crucially, I think, in this tradition would be Philo of Alexandria. And by the way, this is not an exhaustive list. I do plan to get into this topic a bit more in depth, of course, as I've said. But Philo of Alexandria was a Jewish Hellenist who lived at the time of Christ, and he tried to reconcile the philosophical insights of Platonism with the Hebrew Scriptures. And in order to do that, he took the concept of the logos from this prior wellspring of philosophical sources, and applied it to the metaphysical schema of Jewish monotheism. As Philo puts it, quote, "It is manifest that the archetypal seal, which we call the world, which is perceptible only to the intellect, must itself be the archetypal model, the idea of ideas, the reason of God," and of course that being the logos, unquote. He also goes on to say that, quote, "The invisible divine reason, perceptible only to the intellect, Moses calls the image of God, and the image of this image is that light perceptible only by the intellect, which is the image of the divine reason which has explained its generation," unquote. Now, it's important, I think, to go over these pre-Christian philosophical uses of the term in order to see how divine revelation, through the person of St. John the Evangelist, synthesizes each one in their own proper signification and elevates them to a higher state of perfection when married to a uniquely Christian conception of the personally begotten nature of the Son of God. Now, in truth, Christian theology accepts, I would argue, all of these truths about the concept of the Logos, even as it transcends each of them to a higher, elevated unity, much greater than each definition, even taken as an aggregate. What Christianity distinctly and uniquely adds to this is situating what accounts for the cosmic order, reason, formality, and finality, situating all of that within the Godhead itself, entirely prior to the consideration of created things. The divine, thus, is already eternally thought, already eternally known, already eternally ordered, as it were, thereby removing from the equation the necessity to add intermediary demiurges or Proclean henods or separate forms or intelligences in between the divine and that which is not divine in order to account for the presence of Logos in the created world. On the Christian view, the presence of the Logos, because the Logos is the consubstantial Son of the Father, unites creation directly and in an intimately personal way to the divine himself. The Logos is not an abstract principle participating fully in the intimate life of God, but is the divine, subsisting as a hypostasis unto himself, the perfect consubstantial image of divine self-manifestation. As such, he contains eminently the perfections of all finite things which proceed outward from a superabundance of divine love as finite reflections of God's own inner life. As finite reflections of the Logos, which obviously includes the forms, teleology, the intelligible structure of the cosmos, and the order by which it is providentially governed, precisely because they proceed outward from God's understanding of himself, they are all marked by the very personal and intimate divine activity, whereby God knows and loves himself within his own tri-personal inner self-communion. As such, the very same Logos, which proceeds from God's deeply personal and intimate self-communion as eternally begotten Son of the Father, is the same Logos who grounds the intelligibility, rational order, mathematical structure, and providential governance of the cosmos. Those things are the cosmos's extrinsic reception of what is intrinsic and infinite in God himself. There's no disparity between these two conceptions of the Logos, precisely because the Logos of St. John is the eternally begotten personal Son and image of the Father. The Logos is the order through whom the cosmos itself is made, because the cosmos itself is a theophany, a finite reflection or image of the divine. One could say that the cosmos is a finite image of the infinite image of God, that is, of the Logos. St. Maximus the Confessor calls these finite reflections the logoi, which are finite manifestations of the infinite self-manifestation of God within the tripersonal intimacy of his own inner being. So at their deepest ground, I would say, the personal nature of the Logos and the Logos' role as the order or divine reason of the cosmos, they come together. The cosmos, in its intelligible, rational, and even mathematical structure, is created in and through the self-manifestation of divinity within himself, which is eternally begotten in the very person of the Logos, the Son of God himself. So I hope that was a bit helpful as a clarification on this issue. I, of course, plan to touch on it in more detail in the future, as I've said. If something was a bit unclear and you want something clarified, feel free to leave a comment below. And if you sign up for the Patreon, you'll, of course, get a guaranteed response, or at the very least, I can guarantee you a reference to a source that will give you the answer. So I hope that was helpful. I do plan on making weekly content once again. Over the past few weeks, I've been busy with some personal stuff, but I'm back, and if not weekly, at the very least bi-weekly. I have a lot of topics and scripts lined up for that. So yeah, God bless.